Ethan Walker lived an ordinary life in the bustling city of Hartsfield. Days were filled with a steady routine: work, coffee breaks, and the occasional evening walk to clear his mind. But lately, something strange was happening. He had begun to notice a young, strikingly beautiful woman with pale blue skin and soft white hair wherever he went. At first, he brushed it off as a coincidence. The city was big, and people often crossed paths without thinking much of it. But this was different. The woman seemed to be everywhere: outside his favorite coffee shop, in the grocery store aisle, and even on the subway platform. She never approached him or said a word. Instead, she would stand at a distance, her piercing silver eyes fixed on him like she was studying his every move. Ethan told himself it was nothing. "You're imagining things," he muttered as he walked home one evening. Yet the uneasy feeling in his chest refused to go away. It wasn't just her presence, it was how everything around her felt. Odd. The air seemed colder when she was near, and once, when she passed by a street lamp, it flickered and went out. By the third week, Ethan could no longer ignore it. The final straw came when he spotted her outside his apartment building late at night. She was standing on the sidewalk, her gaze fixed on his window. Ethan's heart raced as he stared back from behind the curtain. "This has to stop," he whispered, gripping his phone tightly. The next day, Ethan decided to confront her. If she was following him, he deserved to know why. Armed with determination and a little fear, he waited at the coffee shop where he had seen her often. Hours passed with no sign of her. Just as he began to doubt himself, she appeared. Ethan's breath hitched. She was as striking as ever, her pale blue skin glowing faintly in the sunlight. She wore a sleek black coat that seemed to shimmer like metal, and her movements were smooth, almost too graceful. Gathering his courage, Ethan stood and walked toward her. "Hey," he called, his voice sharper than he intended. The woman stopped and turned slowly, her silver eyes locking onto his. Up close, her beauty was almost otherworldly, and Ethan felt his resolve waver. "Why are you following me?" he demanded, his voice shaking slightly. For a moment, she didn't respond. Her gaze swept over him like she was scanning every inch of his being. Then she smiled, a soft, mysterious curve of her lips that made Ethan's stomach twist. "I cannot tell you yet," she said, her voice calm and melodic. "Not good enough," Ethan snapped. "You've been watching me for weeks. Who are you? What do you want?" The woman tilted her head, as if considering his words. "You will know soon," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "But not today." Before Ethan could say another word, she turned and walked away. He moved to follow her, but the moment he stepped outside, she was gone. It was impossible. There was nowhere for her to hide, no alleys or doorways nearby. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing. Who was she? How could she vanish so quickly? And why did her presence make the air feel heavier, as though something unseen was pressing down on him? That night, as Ethan lay in bed, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, her silver eyes staring into his soul. One thing was clear: this wasn't over. Something was happening, and Ethan was caught in the middle of it. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious woman. Her pale blue skin and silver eyes haunted him. But it wasn't just her appearance. It was the way she spoke, like she knew something he didn't, and the way she disappeared so effortlessly. He couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't entirely normal. The next morning, Ethan decided to take action. He wasn't the kind of guy who liked mysteries, especially when they followed him home. If she wouldn't tell him who she was, he'd figure it out himself. As he walked to work, Ethan kept an eye out for her. Every person he passed made his heart jump, but she wasn't there. Maybe she was done with him, he thought. Maybe her strange interest had shifted to someone else. But that evening, as he left his office building, Ethan froze. Across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost, was the woman. She wasn't trying to hide this time. Her silver eyes met his, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to blur. Ethan's pulse quickened, but instead of running, he forced himself to walk toward her. He needed answers, and this time, he wouldn't let her disappear. "You," he said, stopping a few feet away. "I want the truth. Who are you, and why are you following me?" The woman smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in her eyes now. "Ethan Walker," she said softly. Hearing his name from her lips sent a shiver down his spine. "How do you know my name?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I've always known your name," she replied. "I've been watching you for a long time." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "That doesn't answer my question. Why? What do you want from me?" The woman hesitated, her gaze shifting briefly to the sky. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost vulnerable. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," Ethan shot back. She took a step closer, and for the first time, Ethan noticed a faint energy around her, like the air shimmered wherever she moved. "I'm here to protect you," she said. "You're in danger, Ethan, and you don't even know it." "Protect me," he repeated, his confusion deepening. "From what?" Before she could answer, a sharp, high-pitched sound cut through the air. Ethan winced, covering his ears, but the woman didn't flinch. She turned sharply, her expression darkening as she scanned the area. "They found us," she muttered, more to herself than to Ethan. "Who found us?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling now. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a sleek, metallic device that fit perfectly in her hand. The strange object began to glow faintly as she pressed a series of buttons. "What is that?" Ethan asked, taking a step back. "Stay close to me," she said, her tone commanding now. Ethan wanted to argue, but before he could, the sound of footsteps echoed from the nearby alleyway. He turned to see two tall figures emerging from the shadows. They were humanoid but not human. Their skin was gray and rough, and their eyes glowed faintly red. Ethan's heart pounded as the creatures stepped closer. "What are they?" he whispered. "Trouble," the woman said, raising the device in her hand. A bright beam of light shot from the device, striking one of the creatures and sending it flying backward. The other lunged toward them, but the woman moved faster than Ethan thought possible. She spun around, delivering a swift kick that knocked the creature off balance. "Run," she shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him down the street. Ethan's mind raced as they sprinted through the city. Who was this woman? What were those creatures? And what had he gotten himself into? As they turned a corner, the woman finally slowed down. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. Ethan stared at her, his breath coming in short gasps. "You've got a lot of explaining to do." "I know," she replied, her silver eyes meeting his. "But first, we need to survive." Ethan sat on the edge of the worn couch in the dimly lit safe house. His hand shook as he held a glass of water, trying to steady his nerves. Across the room, the strange woman was pacing back and forth. She moved with a fluid grace that didn't seem human, her silver eyes darting to the window every few seconds. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" Ethan asked, his voice sharper than he intended. The woman stopped and turned to face him. "I told you," she said. "You're in danger. Those creatures back there weren't random. They were sent to find you." "Why me?" Ethan demanded. "I'm just a normal guy. I don't have any enemies, and I definitely don't have anything to do with whatever they are." She sighed, crossing her arms. "You're not as normal as you think," she said. "There's something inside you, something they want." Ethan blinked, confused. "Inside me? What are you talking about?" The woman hesitated, her expression softening. "You carry a unique genetic code," she explained. "It's ancient, and it's powerful. It's why I was sent to watch over you. Without that code, Earth has no chance of defending itself." Ethan let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's ridiculous. I'm not some chosen hero in a sci-fi movie. I'm just a guy who works at a tech company, and eats frozen pizza for dinner. The woman didn't laugh. She stepped closer, her expression serious. You may not believe me now, but the danger is real. Those creatures will keep coming until they get what they're after. Ethan set the glass down and leaned back, rubbing his temples. Okay, fine. Let's say I believe you. What am I supposed to do about it? I don't even know how to fight. That's why I'm here, she said, her tone softening. My name is Kareth. I've been tasked with protecting you and helping you unlock the potential you carry. But I can't do it alone. I need your cooperation. Ethan stared at her, trying to process everything. None of it made sense, but the memory of those gray-skinned creatures and their glowing red eyes was impossible to forget. Something strange was happening, and ignoring it wasn't an option. What kind of potential are we talking about? He asked cautiously. Kareth hesitated, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small metallic device. It looked like a futuristic gadget straight out of a movie. This, she said, is a key. It's linked to your genetic code. Only you can activate it. She handed the device to Ethan. The moment his fingers touched it, the object lit up, humming softly in his hand. Ethan's eyes widened as intricate symbols glowed along its surface. What is this? He whispered. Kareth smiled faintly. It's proof that you're more important than you realize. That device is part of a larger system, a defense network hidden deep within Earth. If activated, it can protect your planet from the forces that are coming. Ethan shook his head, his heart pounding. This is insane. You're telling me I'm some kind of key to saving the world? Yes, Kareth said simply. Before Ethan could respond, a loud crash echoed from outside. Kareth's expression hardened instantly. She grabbed a small weapon from her belt and motioned for Ethan to stay low. They found us, she said, her voice calm but urgent. Ethan's pulse raced as Kareth moved to the window, her weapon ready. What do? He whispered. We fight, she replied. And we survive. As the door rattled under the force of something trying to break in, Ethan tightened his grip on the glowing device. He didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. His life was no longer ordinary. The door shuddered violently, each crash louder than the last. Ethan's hands were clammy as he clutched the strange device. It continued to hum softly, its light pulsating in rhythm with his rapid heartbeat. Kareth crouched near the window, her weapon aimed steadily at the door. Her calmness was unnerving, as if she had been through this 100 times before. Stay behind me, she said firmly, her silver eyes locked on the trembling door. Ethan wanted to argue, to say he didn't want to stay behind anyone. But the truth was, he had no idea what to do. He wasn't a fighter, and whatever was outside wasn't anything he could handle. The door burst open, splintering into pieces as two of the gray-skinned creatures charged in. Their glowing red eyes scanned the room, landing first on Kareth, and then on Ethan. Kareth moved like lightning. She fired her weapon, a burst of light hitting one creature square in the chest. It let out a guttural screech before collapsing to the floor. The second creature lunged at her, claws outstretched, but Kareth dodged with ease, spinning and delivering a kick that sent it crashing into the wall. Ethan's heart raced as he watched. She was incredible, but the danger wasn't over. More figures appeared in the doorway, their eerie eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Kareth glanced back at Ethan. The device, she shouted. Hold it up and focus. What? Focus on what? He stammered, panic creeping into his voice. Just trust me, she yelled, blocking another attack from the advancing creatures. Ethan raised the device, gripping it tightly. He tried to focus, though he didn't know what that even meant. The symbols on the device glowed brighter, and the hum grew louder. Suddenly, a burst of energy shot out, filling the room with a blinding blue light. The creatures froze, their movements jerky, as if they were caught in invisible chains. Kareth wasted no time, taking them down one by one with swift, precise attacks. When the last creature fell, The room went eerily quiet. The blue light from the device dimmed, leaving only the faint hum behind. Ethan stared at it, his hands trembling. "What? What just happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kareth approached him, her expression both relieved and impressed. "You activated it," she said. "The device responds to you. It's more powerful than I thought." Ethan looked at her, still struggling to catch his breath. "I didn't even know what I was doing." "You didn't need to," Kareth replied. "Your connection to it is instinctual. That's why you're so important." Ethan slumped onto the couch, his mind spinning. Just hours ago, he was a regular guy worrying about work deadlines. Now he was being attacked by creatures from another world and holding a device that apparently had the power to stop them. "Why is this happening to me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Kareth sat beside him, her tone softening. "I know this is overwhelming," she said, "but you're not alone in this. I'm here to help you, and I won't let anything happen to you." Ethan looked at her, searching her eyes for any hint of deceit. But all he saw was sincerity. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We need to move," Kareth said. "This safe house isn't safe anymore. They'll send more." Ethan nodded reluctantly, standing up. "Where are we going?" "To a place where you can learn to control the device," Kareth said, "and where we might find answers about who's behind all this." As they stepped outside into the cold night, Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and determination. He didn't know what was waiting for him, but one thing was clear: there was no turning back now. The night air was cold and sharp as Ethan followed Kareth through the empty streets. The city, which usually buzzed with life, felt strangely quiet, as if it, too, was holding its breath. Ethan clutched the device tightly, its faint hum a constant reminder that his life had changed forever. Kareth moved with purpose, her silver eyes scanning their surroundings. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, but Ethan had no idea what to expect. "Where are we headed?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. "There's a place on the outskirts of the city," Kareth replied without looking back. "It's hidden and secure. We'll be safe there, for a while at least." Ethan frowned. "And then what?" "We just keep running." Kareth stopped abruptly and turned to face him. "This isn't just about running," she said firmly. "We need to figure out how to unlock the full potential of that device. It's the only way to protect you and Earth." Ethan sighed, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "I didn't ask for any of this," he muttered. Kareth's expression softened. "I know," she said gently. "But you're stronger than you think, Ethan. I wouldn't be here if you weren't." Her words, though meant to reassure him, only added to his unease. What did she mean by stronger? He didn't feel strong. He felt like a regular guy thrown into something far beyond his understanding. As they continued walking, Ethan noticed the streets becoming darker and less familiar. The tall buildings gave way to warehouses and empty lots, the glow of the city lights fading into the distance. Finally, Kareth stopped in front of an old, abandoned building. The windows were boarded up, and the walls were covered in graffiti. "This is it?" Ethan asked, his doubt evident. Kareth smirked. "Don't judge it by how it looks," she said. She placed her hand on the rusted door, and a small panel slid open, revealing a glowing keypad. She pressed a sequence of buttons, and with a soft hiss, the door unlocked. Ethan followed her inside, his eyes widening as he stepped into the building. The interior was nothing like the crumbling exterior. The space was filled with advanced technology, holographic screens, strange machines humming with energy, and walls lined with what looked like alien tools and weapons. "What is this place?" he asked, staring in awe. "It's a safe house built by my people," Kareth explained. "A hidden outpost we use when operating on Earth." Ethan turned to her, his curiosity growing. "Your people? Are they all like you?" Kareth hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, but I'm not exactly like them anymore. I broke a lot of rules coming here to help you." "Why would you do that?" Ethan asked. Kareth's gaze softened. Because I believe in what Earth stands for, and because I believe in you. Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. He looked down at the device in his hands, its glow reflecting in his eyes. So, what do we do now? Kareth walked over to a central console and activated a holographic screen. First, I need to run a scan of the device. It might reveal more about what it can do and why those creatures are after you. Ethan nodded and handed it to her. As Kareth worked, Ethan's mind raced with questions. Who were these enemies? Why was he chosen? And how much danger was he really in? Kareth's voice broke through his thoughts. Ethan, come here. You need to see this. He stepped closer, staring at the hologram. It displayed a series of complex symbols and data streams that made no sense to him. What is it? He asked. Kareth's expression was grim. This device isn't just a key, it's a beacon. And it's already been activated. Ethan's blood ran cold. What does that mean? It means, Kareth said, her voice heavy with urgency, they know exactly where we are. Ethan stared at the holographic display, his heart pounding. What do you mean they know where we are? He asked, his voice rising. Kareth's fingers flew over the console, shutting down the beacon signal as quickly as possible. The device sent out a signal when you activated it, she explained. It's like a flare in the night sky. Whoever is hunting you knows our exact location now. Ethan felt a cold dread wash over him. Can't we just turn it off? Hide it or something? Kareth shook her head, her expression grim. It doesn't work like that. The signal's already out there. They'll be here soon. As if on cue, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the building. Ethan's eyes darted to the boarded-up windows, his stomach tightening. They're already here, aren't they? He whispered. Kareth grabbed a small device from the console and handed it to him. Take this, she said. It's a shield generator. It'll protect you for a short time if things get bad. What about you? Ethan asked, his voice shaking. Kareth smirked. I don't need one. The rumbling grew louder, followed by a sharp crash as something struck the building. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the air filled with a strange metallic scent. They're breaching the walls, Kareth said, grabbing her weapon and strapping it to her side. We need to move. Ethan followed her as she led him through the maze-like corridors of the safe house. The technology and alien equipment blurred past him as his mind raced with fear and confusion. Where are we going? He asked, struggling to keep up. To the transport room, Kareth replied. We have a chance to escape, but we need to hurry. They reached a large, circular room with a platform in the center. Strange symbols were etched into the floor, glowing faintly. Kareth ran to a control panel and began entering commands. What is this? Ethan asked, his voice trembling. A teleportation pad, Kareth explained. It'll take us to another safe house far from here, but it takes time to power up. Ethan glanced back at the hallway they had just come through. The crashing sounds were getting closer, accompanied by guttural growls that made his skin crawl. We don't have time, he said urgently. Kareth didn't stop working. We don't have a choice. If we stay here, we won't survive. As the platform began to glow brighter, a deafening roar echoed from the hallway. Ethan turned just in time to see one of the gray-skinned creatures charging toward them, its red eyes blazing. Kareth, he shouted. She spun around and fired her weapon, the beam of light hitting the creature in the chest and sending it flying backward. More creatures followed, their claws scraping against the walls as they advanced. Get on the platform, Kareth yelled, firing at the creatures to hold them back. Ethan hesitated for a moment, his fear paralyzing him. But the look in Kareth's eyes pushed him forward. He stepped onto the glowing platform, clutching the shield generator tightly. Kareth fired one last shot before leaping onto the platform beside him. She hit a button on her wrist, and the glowing symbols beneath them flared to life. The creatures lunged forward, their claws reaching for the platform just as a bright light engulfed Ethan and Kareth. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the world around them shifted. Ethan stumbled as they reappeared in a dimly lit room. The air was cool and still, and the sounds of the creatures were gone. "We made it," Kareth said, breathing heavily. Ethan collapsed onto the floor, his legs shaking. What was that?" Kareth knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "That was just the beginning," she said softly. "But we're safe for now." Ethan looked at her, his fear mingled with exhaustion. "How long can we keep running?" Kareth's silver eyes met his. "We're not just running, Ethan," she said firmly. "We're preparing for the fight to come." Ethan sat against the cold wall of the new safe house, his breathing slowly returning to normal. The room they had teleported to was smaller than the last one, but it had the same strange, advanced technology scattered around. Dim lights cast soft shadows across the metallic walls, and the air felt eerily still. Kareth stood near the door, checking a device on her wrist. Her face was tense, her silver eyes scanning the holographic display that hovered above her arm. Ethan watched her, feeling a mix of admiration and frustration. "You keep saying we're preparing," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "But how am I supposed to fight something like that? I don't even know what I'm doing." Kareth turned to him, her expression softening slightly. "You're doing more than you realize, Ethan," she said. "That device you carry is already responding to you. It's not something just anyone can use." Ethan frowned, holding up the glowing device. "This thing, it's just a weird gadget. I don't even know how I activated it back there." "That's because it's connected to you," Kareth explained. She crouched down in front of him, her tone calm and impatient. "The device is more than a tool. It's a part of you now. It responds to your instincts, your emotions. That's why you were able to stop those creatures earlier." Ethan shook his head, his frustration boiling over. "But I didn't stop them. You did. I just held this thing and hoped for the best." Kareth placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but reassuring. "You've already taken the first step, Ethan. That's more than most people could handle. Now we need to take the next one." He looked at her, the doubt in his eyes slowly giving way to determination. "What's the next step?" Kareth smiled faintly and stood up. She walked over to a console and tapped a few buttons, activating a holographic screen that displayed a detailed map of Earth. Red dots blinked across the map, scattered in various locations. "These are tracking signals from the creatures," Kareth explained. "They're not just after you. They're scouting Earth for something else. Something bigger." Ethan stared at the map, his stomach sinking. "What are they looking for?" Kareth hesitated before answering. "A gateway," she said. "A portal that connects Earth to their world. If they find it and activate it, more of them will come. Enough to overwhelm your planet." Ethan's grip on the device tightened. "So, what do we do? Destroy the gateway?" Kareth nodded. "Exactly. But to do that, we need to find it first. And that's where the device comes in." Ethan blinked, confused. "How does this thing help us find a gateway?" Kareth walked back to him and pointed at the glowing symbols on the device. "The device is linked to their technology. It can intercept their signals, track their movements, and even disrupt their systems. With your connection to it, you can guide us to the gateway before they reach it." Ethan's heart raced as he processed her words. "You're saying I'm the only one who can stop them?" Kareth nodded, her expression serious. "Yes, but you won't be doing it alone. I'll be with you every step of the way." Ethan took a deep breath, his mind swirling with fear and doubt. But beneath it all, a spark of determination began to grow. For the first time, he felt like he had a purpose in all of this. "What do I need to do?" he asked. Kareth smiled, a rare moment of warmth breaking through her usual seriousness. "First, we train," she said. "You need to learn how to control the device and understand its power. Once you're ready, we'll track the gateway and stop them." Ethan stood up, clutching the device in his hand. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do this." As Kareth began to set up the training area, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that everything in his life had led to this moment. He wasn't sure he was ready, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't run anymore. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, his breath coming in short gasps. He stood in the center of the small training room, gripping the glowing device tightly in his hand. Around him, holographic targets flickered in and out of existence, each one designed to test his focus and reflexes. Kareth watched from the side, her arms crossed. "You're getting better," she said, her voice calm but encouraging. Ethan groaned, lowering the device. "Better? I've missed half the targets. How is that better?" "You're learning to control the device," Kareth replied, stepping closer. "It's not about hitting every target. It's about understanding how the device reacts to your emotions. When you panic, the energy becomes unstable. When you focus, it flows smoothly." Ethan looked down at the glowing symbols on the device. It felt strange in his hands, almost alive, as if it could sense his thoughts. "This thing is more complicated than I thought," he muttered. Kareth smiled faintly. "You're adapting faster than most would. The fact that you're even standing here proves how strong you are." Ethan glanced at her, surprised by the compliment. "You keep saying that, but I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm in way over my head." Kareth's expression softened. "Strength isn't just about skill or power," she said. "It's about choosing to fight, even when you're scared. And you've done that, Ethan. That's what makes you different." Before Ethan could respond, a sharp beeping sound interrupted them. Kareth turned to the console, her silver eyes narrowing as she studied the holographic map. "What is it?" Ethan asked, walking over. "They're on the move," Kareth said, pointing to several red dots on the map. "The creatures are converging on a single location." Ethan frowned, his chest tightening. "Is that the gateway?" Kareth nodded grimly. "It has to be. They wouldn't be gathering in such numbers otherwise." Ethan stared at the map, his mind racing. The red dots were clustered in a remote area far from the city, deep in the mountains. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Not long," Kareth replied. "Once they activate the gateway, it'll be too late to stop them." Ethan swallowed hard, his grip tightening on the device. "Then we have to go now." Kareth hesitated, her gaze meeting his. "You've come a long way, Ethan, but this won't be like the training simulations. This will be real, dangerous, if you're not ready." "I don't have a choice," Ethan interrupted. "If we don't stop them, Earth is done for, right?" Kareth nodded slowly. "Then I'm ready," Ethan said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Kareth smiled faintly, her pride evident. "All right," she said. "Let's gear up." They moved quickly, gathering weapons and supplies from the safe house. Kareth handed Ethan a small device that fit around his wrist. "This is a backup shield generator," she explained. "If things get bad, activate it. It'll buy you some time." Ethan nodded, strapping it on. "What about you?" Kareth smirked. "I'll manage." Moments later, they were outside, the cool night air biting at their skin. Kareth activated a sleek hover vehicle, its engine humming softly as it lifted off the ground. Ethan climbed in beside her, gripping the edge of his seat as they soared into the sky. The journey to the mountains was tense and silent. Ethan stared out the window, his mind replaying everything that had happened. He still didn't fully understand why he had been chosen, but he knew he couldn't back down now. As they approached the location, Kareth slowed the vehicle and landed it in a hidden clearing. The air was thick with tension, and the faint hum of energy could be heard in the distance. "This is it," Kareth said, stepping out and checking her weapon. Ethan followed, clutching the glowing device. "What's the plan?" Kareth's silver eyes locked onto his. "We fight our way in, shut down the gateway, and stop them from bringing reinforcements. You're the key, Ethan. Stay close to me, and we'll get through this." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. As they moved toward the source of the energy, he felt a strange mix of fear and determination. This was his chance to prove himself, to protect his world. and he wasn't going to let anyone down. The night was unnaturally quiet as Ethan and Kareth moved through the dense forest. The faint glow of the glowing device in Ethan's hand cast long shadows on the ground, the only source of light in the dark wilderness. Every step felt heavy with the weight of what they were about to face. "Stay focused," Kareth whispered, her voice low but firm. "We're close. The gateway is just beyond this ridge." Ethan nodded, his heart racing. His thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and fear. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who had gotten caught in something he didn't understand. But he had no choice now. As they reached the ridge, Ethan could see a faint light flickering in the distance. It wasn't the soft glow of a campfire. It was something else, something unnatural. "There it is," Kareth said, her eyes scanning the area. "We need to move quickly. Once they activate the gateway, there's no going back." Ethan's grip on the device tightened. He could feel the energy building inside it, responding to his growing anxiety. They crept forward, staying low and silent, until they reached the edge of a clearing. In the center, a large, shimmering portal flickered like a hole in the air. Standing around it were the gray-skinned creatures, their red eyes glowing menacingly. "We need to stop them before they open it completely," Kareth said urgently. "I'll take out the guards. You focus on the device. It'll need you to deactivate the gateway." Ethan nodded, his stomach tightening with fear. He didn't know how he was supposed to do any of this, but he knew he couldn't let the creatures succeed. Kareth moved like a shadow, silently making her way to the nearest creature. With a quick, precise movement, she took it down without a sound. Another creature turned, sensing the movement, but Kareth was already on the move, striking with a swift kick and knocking it off balance. Ethan watched, awe and fear mixing as Kareth effortlessly took down the remaining guards one by one. But there was no time to waste. He turned his attention to the portal, the glowing device in his hands pulsing more intensely. He stepped forward, feeling a strange, almost magnetic pull toward the portal. The device hummed louder, and Ethan could sense it was trying to connect with the gateway. He wasn't sure how, but he knew this was the moment. Taking a deep breath, he raised the device in front of him and focused. The symbols on the device glowed brighter, responding to his thoughts, his emotions. He felt the energy build up in his chest, like a pressure that was about to explode. He closed his eyes, trying to clear his mind, focusing on the feeling of the device, the rhythm of its energy. Then, with all the concentration he could muster, he willed the device to deactivate the gateway. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the light from the device flared, and the symbols on it shifted, glowing with a brilliant intensity. The portal flickered violently, its edges warping and distorting. The creatures who had been focused on the gateway turned in alarm. "No," one of them screamed, reaching toward the portal. But it was too late. The portal collapsed in on itself with a loud crack, like the sound of something being torn apart. The creatures screamed in fury as the gateway vanished completely. Ethan stood frozen, his heart racing, still holding the device. The world around him felt quieter now, the tension in the air lifting. Kareth stepped up beside him, her silver eyes meeting his. She was breathing heavily, but there was a hint of relief in her expression. "You did it," she said softly. Ethan looked down at the device in his hand, still humming softly. He had done it. He had stopped the invasion. But as the adrenaline began to wear off, a wave of exhaustion hit him. He sank to his knees, still in disbelief over what had just happened. Kareth knelt beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "You were incredible, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with respect. Ethan could hardly believe it. He had been scared, uncertain, but in the end, he had done what needed to be done. I didn't think I could do it," he admitted, his voice shaky. "But I had to." Kareth smiled, her gaze softening. "That's all it takes. You chose to fight. And now, Earth is safe." Ethan looked up at her, a feeling of pride slowly building inside him. Maybe he wasn't just some regular guy after all. Maybe he was capable of more than he ever realized. Together, they stood in the quiet aftermath, the threat now behind them. But one thing was clear: this was just the beginning. And whatever came next, Ethan was ready.